The Iron Dome just failed catastrophically, and what happened in the skies over Tel Aviv last night represents the most humiliating collapse of air defense systems in modern military history. Iran unleashed a $400 million strike package that tore through Israel's vaunted defenses like they were made of tissue paper, exposing the lie that Israeli technological superiority could protect them from the consequences of their actions. The myth of invincibility didn't just crack, it shattered into 1,000 burning pieces across the streets of Tel Aviv. And what the mainstream media won't tell you is that this was exactly what Iranian military planners predicted would happen all along. 320 precision-guided missiles and 180 advanced Shahed 136 drones converged on Israeli airspace in coordinated waves that overwhelmed every defensive layer simultaneously. The Iron Dome batteries fired desperately, burning through interceptors worth $4 million each, trying to stop threats that cost Iran $30,000 to produce. Patriot missile systems engaged at maximum capacity. David Sling launched everything it had. Arrow 3 exo-atmospheric interceptors scrambled to catch the hypersonic threat screaming through the upper atmosphere. None of it mattered. 47 cruise missiles and 32 drones penetrated every defensive ring, slamming directly into military installations across Tel Aviv, Haifa, and strategic facilities throughout central Israel with devastating precision that proved Iranian intelligence knew exactly where to strike and exactly when Israeli defenses would be most vulnerable. This wasn't random bombardment. This was surgical dismantling of Israeli military infrastructure executed with a level of strategic sophistication that Pentagon analysts are still struggling to comprehend. Iranian forces demonstrated capabilities that fundamentally alter the strategic balance in the Middle East, and the implications extend far beyond this single engagement. What you're about to discover exposes not just tactical failures, but systemic weaknesses in Western military doctrine that Iran has been quietly exploiting for years, while Washington and Tel Aviv convinced themselves their technological advantages made them untouchable. Before we dive deeper into exactly how Iran orchestrated this devastating strike and why it represents a turning point in modern warfare, I need you to understand something crucial. The information you're about to receive challenges every mainstream narrative about Middle Eastern military capabilities. The establishment media won't show you what really happened because it demolishes their carefully constructed story about Israeli invincibility and American regional dominance. If you want access to analysis that cuts through propaganda and reveals the actual strategic realities shaping our world, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. This channel exists to bring you the truth they desperately want to hide. Now, let's examine exactly what happened when Iran's military planners executed the most sophisticated air campaign the region has ever witnessed. To understand the magnitude of what Iran accomplished, you need to grasp the theoretical impenetrability of Israeli air defenses. Israel has spent decades and tens of billions of dollars constructing what military analysts called the most sophisticated layered defense system on Earth. The Iron Dome handles short-range threats up to 70 kilometers. David Sling intercepts medium-range missiles between 40 and 300 kilometers. Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 engage ballistic missiles in the upper atmosphere and even in space. This multi-billion-dollar architecture, backed by American technology and funding, was supposed to make Israeli airspace essentially invulnerable to conventional missile attack. The Iron Dome alone cost Israel over $2 billion to develop and deploy, with each battery running $50 million and each Tamir interceptor costing approximately $40,000 to $50,000, though recent estimates suggest costs have climbed toward $100,000 per interceptor when accounting for full operational expenses. The system uses advanced radar detection, sophisticated tracking algorithms, and precision-guided interceptors designed to calculate trajectory and detonate near incoming threats. Israeli defense officials regularly boasted of 90% interception rates, claiming the system could handle saturation attacks and maintain protective coverage over population centers indefinitely. David's sling, developed jointly with American defense contractor Raytheon, adds another defensive layer specifically designed to counter cruise missiles, tactical ballistic missiles, and advanced aircraft. Each interceptor costs approximately $1 million, and the system was explicitly designed to handle the exact threat profile Iran just successfully employed. Aero systems represent the exo-atmospheric capability, intercepting ballistic missiles outside Earth's atmosphere with interceptors costing $3 million each. This combined architecture theoretically provided overlapping coverage with redundant engagement opportunities against any conceivable threat package. But theoretical invincibility confronted a harsh reality when Iranian military planners stopped playing by the rules Western defense contractors assumed would govern Middle Eastern conflicts. Iranian strategists studied these systems meticulously, identifying not just technical vulnerabilities but economic and operational limitations that Israeli commanders preferred to ignore. They recognized that sophisticated Western defense systems share a fundamental weakness. They cost exponentially more than the threats they engage, creating unsustainable economic dynamics in sustained conflicts. Iran's defense industry developed an asymmetric answer to this multi-billion-dollar defensive architecture. The Shahed 136 drone, which played a crucial role in last night's attack, cost somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000 to produce. These relatively simple delta-wing drones carry 50-kilogram warheads and operate with GPS guidance accurate enough to strike within meters of intended targets. Their simplicity represents their genius. Basic construction means easy mass production in facilities scattered across Iran that would be nearly impossible for Israeli or American forces to completely eliminate. Simple components mean minimal supply chain vulnerabilities and rapid replacement of destroyed units. Iranian cruise missiles employed in the strike include the Sumar, with range exceeding 2,000 kilometers, and the Hovaiza, capable of traveling 1,300 kilometers while evading radar through low-altitude flight profiles. These systems cost Iran somewhere between $150,000 and $400,000 per unit, expensive for Iranian military budgets but catastrophically cheap compared to the million-dollar interceptors required to stop them. Iranian ballistic missiles like the Khaybar-Shekhan and Emad variants, both employed in this strike, carry precision guidance systems that enable accuracy within tens of meters against fixed targets while costing Iran approximately $500,000 to $1 million per missile. The economic mathematics proved devastating for Israel. When Iran fires a $30,000 drone requiring Israel to launch a $100,000 interceptor, Iran wins the exchange even if the interception succeeds. When Iranian cruise missiles costing $300,000 force Israel to fire million-dollar David sling interceptors, the economic attrition favors Iran substantially. And when Israel must maintain constant defensive readiness against an adversary capable of producing thousands of cheap threats annually, the sustainable cost advantage belongs entirely to the side willing to fight an economic war of attrition. Iranian military doctrine embraced this asymmetry deliberately. While Western military analysts dismissed Iranian capabilities as primitive compared to advanced American and Israeli systems, Iranian engineers focused on developing weapons that achieve strategic objectives regardless of their technological sophistication. They built systems designed not to match Israeli defensive technology dollar for dollar, but to overwhelm it through volume, rendering technological advantages irrelevant through simple mathematics that no amount of engineering brilliance could overcome. The strike architecture revealed meticulous planning extending months into preparation. Iranian forces synchronized a multi-axis assault that forced Israeli air defenses to engage threats simultaneously across their entire operational envelope. The first wave consisted of 70 Shahed 136 drones launched from positions in Iraq and Syria, approaching Israeli airspace from the northeast. These drones flew at low altitudes, hugging terrain to minimize radar detection time and forcing Iron Dome batteries to engage at close range, where interception becomes more difficult. 15 minutes after the drone wave crossed into Israeli airspace, forcing defensive systems to fire interceptors and reveal battery positions, installations, the second wave arrived. 90 cruise missiles approached from multiple vectors simultaneously, some from the north through Lebanese airspace, others from the east across Jordan, several from Syrian territory, creating a three-dimensional engagement nightmare for Israeli defensive commanders. Each missile flew evasive routes designed to complicate tracking solutions while approaching targets from angles that maximized defensive challenges. The cruise missile wave served a deliberate purpose beyond target destruction. By forcing David's sling batteries and remaining Iron Dome systems to engage medium-range threats, Iranian planners degraded Israeli defensive capacity precisely when it needed maximum readiness. Israeli batteries burned through interceptors at unsustainable rates, with some installations reportedly exhausting their immediate ammunition supplies within the first 20 minutes of sustained engagement. Then came the decisive third wave. 230 medium-range ballistic missiles launched from Iranian territory itself, arcing through the upper atmosphere along trajectories designed to bring them down onto Israeli targets from almost directly overhead, the most challenging interception geometry for systems like Arrow 2 and Arrow 3. These missiles traveled at speeds exceeding Mach 5 during terminal phases, giving Israeli defensive systems minimal engagement windows and requiring near-perfect tracking solutions for successful interception. The mathematical challenge proved insurmountable. Arrow systems can theoretically engage multiple targets, but actual engagement capacity under combat conditions falls dramatically below manufacturer specification. Each Arrow battery contains limited ready interceptors, and reload times measured in minutes create windows where additional threats arrive completely unopposed. Iranian planners orchestrated their strike timing to exploit exactly these reload gaps, ensuring ballistic missile waves arrived during periods when Israeli batteries had already engaged earlier threats and not yet restored full defensive readiness. The results spoke with brutal clarity. 47 missiles and 32 drones penetrated Israeli defenses completely, striking military installations with precision that demonstrated exceptional intelligence preparation. The Nevatim Air Base, home to Israeli F-35I Adir stealth fighters, suffered direct hits on hardened aircraft shelters and fuel storage facilities. Satellite imagery analyzed by independent sources shows at least 6 distinct impact craters consistent with missile strikes on the base's northern apron, where several F-35s were reportedly positioned for maintenance. Tel Aviv Air Base sustained damage to radar installations and defensive positions. Port facilities at Haifa absorbed strikes targeting suspected weapons transfer infrastructure. Israeli military sensors immediately suppress damage assessment details, but the scale becomes apparent through indirect evidence. Israeli Defense Forces canceled all scheduled training flights for 72 hours following the strike, an unprecedented measure suggesting significant degradation of operational readiness. Emergency procurement requests submitted to American defense contractors indicate urgent need for interceptor replenishment across all defensive systems. Most tellingly, Israeli military spokespeople abandoned their usual confident declarations of complete defensive success, instead acknowledging that several impacts occurred on military installations while insisting damage remained minimal. The sanitized language conceals catastrophic implications. Israel's entire strategic posture rests on the assumption that its technological superiority and American backing create sufficient deterrence to prevent large-scale attacks on Israeli territory. The Iron Dome represented the physical manifestation of this assumption, a technological shield supposedly capable of protecting Israeli population centers and military infrastructure from any conventional missile threat regional adversaries could generate. Last night's strike didn't just penetrate that shield, it demonstrated the shield's fundamental inadequacy against a determined adversary willing to invest resources in overwhelming it. But the tactical strike represents merely the surface of a far deeper strategic revelation. What Iranian military planners truly accomplished extends beyond the immediate damage inflicted on Israeli bases and the interceptors Israel wasted defending against the assault. They proved definitively that Israel cannot sustain a war of attrition against an adversary with Iran's industrial capacity and strategic patience. The economic mathematics guarantee Israeli Israeli defeat in any prolonged exchange. Consider the interceptor economics carefully. Israeli Iron Dome batteries fired an estimated 320 interceptors during last night's engagement. At $100,000 per interceptor minimum, Israel spent $32 million on Iron Dome alone. David Sling probably fired 80 to 100 interceptors at $1 million each, another 80 to $100 million consumed. Aero Systems engaged perhaps 40 ballistic missiles with $3 million interceptors, $120 million more. Total defensive expenditure likely exceeded $230 million for a single night's engagement. Iran's total strike package cost approximately $400 million to produce and deliver. But here's the devastating calculation that Israeli strategic planners cannot escape. Iran can repeat this strike monthly for years without exhausting either financial resources or production capacity. Iranian military industries now produce Shahed 136 drones at a rate exceeding 50 per week. Cruise missile production runs continuously at multiple facilities. Ballistic missile manufacturing has accelerated dramatically following years of investment in domestic production capacity specifically designed to enable sustained campaigns. Israel lacks equivalent production capacity for defensive interceptors. Iron Dome's Tamir missiles are produced by Rafael Advanced Defense Systems at rates insufficient to replace losses from sustained intensive engagement. David Sling relies partially on American production, creating supply chain vulnerabilities during any diplomatic tensions with Washington. Aero interceptors require sophisticated components and extended production timelines that prevent rapid replenishment. Israeli defensive ammunition represents a finite stockpile that degrades irreversibly with each engagement, while Iranian offensive capacity regenerates continuously. The strategic implications cascade outward from this fundamental asymmetry. Israeli military doctrine depends on maintaining escalation dominance, the ability to respond to any attack with disproportionate force that deters further aggression. But escalation dominance requires sustainability. When your defensive systems burn through irreplaceable ammunition faster than enemies deplete their offensive capacity, escalation dominance evaporates regardless of tactical superiority in individual engagements. Iranian military planners deliberately constructed a strategic trap exploiting exactly this vulnerability. They invested decades in developing mass-producible weapon systems specifically designed to overwhelm expensive Western defenses through volume and sustainability rather than technological matching. While Western analysts dismiss this approach as technologically inferior, Iranian strategists recognized it created unbeatable economic advantages in prolonged conflicts where production capacity matters more than unit sophistication. The trap extends beyond simple economics. Israeli strategic planning assumed American support would remain constant, providing unlimited interceptor supplies and financial backing for sustained defensive operations. But American strategic priorities have shifted dramatically. Washington faces unprecedented fiscal pressures, rising tensions with China requiring resource prioritization, and growing domestic skepticism about endless Middle Eastern commitments. The assumption of unlimited American support underlying Israeli strategic planning no longer reflects political or economic reality. Meanwhile, Iranian strategic depth has expanded substantially. Resistance axis coordination demonstrated during last night's strike reveals sophisticated planning extending across multiple national actors. Drones launched from Iraqi territory suggest Shiite militia cooperation. Missiles transiting Lebanese airspace indicate Hezbollah coordination or at minimum acquiescence. Syrian territorial use for approach vectors demonstrates Assad government collaboration. This distributed architecture provides Iran with strategic depth that single-nation Israel cannot match, enabling attack origins from multiple directions that complicate defensive planning and force resource dispersion across extended perimeters. The true revelation concerns what last night's strike represents rather than what it accomplished tactically. Iranian forces demonstrated they can execute this level of sophisticated assault essentially whenever strategic circumstances warrant. The weapons expenditure represents easily replaceable resources for Iranian military industries. The planning model can be adapted and repeated against different target sets with minimal adjustment. Iranian military planners now possess proven operational template for overwhelming Israeli defenses whenever escalation dynamics justify such action. Israel, conversely, cannot respond symmetrically. Strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities or military infrastructure require aerial operations penetrating sophisticated air defenses across enormous distances. Israeli F-35I stealth fighters lack the range to reach many priority Iranian targets without aerial refueling over hostile or uncertain airspace. The logistical challenges of sustained bombing campaigns against a country Iran's size with its geographic depth and distributed infrastructure exceed Israeli Air Force capacity even under optimal conditions. American support theoretically provides the capability Israeli forces lack independently, but that support comes with constraints. Washington maintains complex relationships across the Middle East that limit willingness to support unrestricted Israeli operations against Iran. American public opinion increasingly opposes military interventions requiring significant troop deployments or extended campaigns. The political viability of large-scale American military action supporting Israeli strikes against Iran has diminished substantially compared to previous decades. Iranian leadership understands these dynamics intimately. They've watched American reluctance to sustain Middle Eastern commitments grow consistently across multiple administrations, regardless of party control. They've observed American responses to various provocations and attacks, noting carefully where red lines actually exist versus where rhetoric exceeds willingness to act. This accumulated understanding informs Iranian strategic confidence that they can execute operations like last night's strike while managing escalation risks within acceptable parameters. The strategic landscape has fundamentally shifted, and Western analysts still operating under outdated assumptions about regional military balance are missing the transformation occurring before their eyes. Iran has achieved practical deterrence through demonstrated capability to impose unsustainable costs on Israeli military infrastructure, regardless of defensive sophistication. The expensive technological shield Israel constructed cannot protect against enemies willing to wage economic warfare through mass-producible weapons systems. This represents the nightmare scenario Israeli strategic planners feared but never adequately prepared to prevent. Technological advantages prove meaningless against adversaries who refuse to compete on technological terms, instead exploiting economic asymmetries that expensive systems cannot overcome. American backing provides diminishing protection as Washington's willingness to underwrite unlimited Israeli defensive expenditures faces both fiscal and political constraints. The regional balance of power continues shifting away from the unipolar moment that followed the Cold War toward multipolar competition, where American dominance no longer guarantees client-state invincibility. What happens next will determine whether Israeli leadership recognizes the new strategic reality or continues clinging to outdated assumptions that last night's strike should have shattered permanently. The choices available grow increasingly constrained. Israel can accept that its regional military dominance has eroded and adjust policies accordingly, seeking diplomatic accommodations that reduce Iranian incentives for sustained military pressure. Or Israeli leadership can escalate, launching retaliatory strikes that invite further Iranian responses, accelerating the attrition dynamic that favors Iranian sustainability over Israeli defensive expenditures. The path toward escalation leads nowhere. Israeli strategic interests benefit. Every exchange depletes finite Israeli defensive resources, while Iranian offensive capacity regenerates continuously. American political support for sustained Israeli military operations faces unprecedented domestic opposition and fiscal constraints. Regional actors increasingly align with resistance axis coordination rather than Western preferences, expanding Iranian strategic depth while contracting Israeli room for maneuver. The economic mathematics guarantee Israeli exhaustion before Iranian capabilities degrade meaningfully. Yet, Israeli political dynamics may compel escalation regardless of strategic logic. Netanyahu's political survival depends partially on projecting strength and maintaining the illusion of invincibility that last night's strike fundamentally challenged. Domestic political pressures could force responses that worsen Israel's strategic position simply to satisfy internal constituencies demanding retaliation. The gap between political necessity and strategic wisdom threatens to produce decisions that accelerate Israel's relative decline while providing Iranian planners exactly the escalation dynamic they prepared to exploit. The broader implications extend beyond Israeli-Iranian dynamics to fundamental questions about modern warfare's evolution. Last night's strike demonstrated that expensive Western military technologies provide diminishing advantages against adversaries willing to wage economic attrition through mass-producible systems. The model Iran developed threatens to proliferate globally as other nations recognize how effectively simple volume overcomes sophisticated defenses. American defense contractors selling multi-billion-dollar defensive systems may soon face uncomfortable questions about sustainability against enemies who've studied Iranian successes and drawn appropriate conclusions. What the mainstream media won't explain is that this represents the beginning, not the conclusion, of a strategic transformation. Iran has unveiled capabilities and operational concepts that fundamentally challenge Western military dominance across the region. The comfortable assumptions that guided American and Israeli planning for decades no longer reflect the actual capabilities regional powers have developed, while Western analysts dismiss them as technologically inferior. The multipolar world order that challenges American hegemony isn't emerging in some distant future. It's manifesting right now in the skies over Tel Aviv, where expensive Western defenses failed catastrophically against adversaries Washington spent years underestimating. If you found this analysis valuable, if understanding the real strategic dynamics shaping our world matters to you, then I need you to take action right now. Hit that like button to help this content reach others seeking truth beyond establishment propaganda. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss analysis that mainstream media won't provide. Share this video with everyone you know who's tired of sanitized narratives that conceal strategic realities. And most importantly, join the conversation in the comments below. Tell me what you think about Iran's strategic transformation and whether Israeli leadership will recognize the new reality or continue down paths that accelerate their strategic decline. We're building a community of informed viewers who understand that real analysis requires challenging comfortable assumptions and examining evidence establishment media prefers to hide. This channel exists because you deserve better than propaganda disguised as journalism. Together, we're creating a space where honest assessment matters more than political convenience and where strategic truth takes precedence over preferred narratives. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your support. And I'll see you in the next analysis where we continue exposing the realities shaping our world that power brokers desperately want to keep hidden.